All right, let's get into it. The United Nations. We hear that name all the time in the news, but what is it really? How did it even start? What's it supposed to be doing? And here's the big question. After all these years, is it actually working? We're going to break down the blueprint for what was meant to be a safer world.
Now, this quote, this gets right to the heart of it. This isn't just some fancy diplomatic phrase. This is a promise, one that was written in the shadow of absolute unimaginable destruction, to save mankind from the scourge of war. I mean, just think about the weight of those words. That single phrase really sets the stage for everything the UN was created to be. And to really get the UN, you have to go back to a time when the world was literally in ashes. This idea wasn't dreamed up in some peaceful, quiet conference room. Nope, it was forged in the fire of 2 world wars and the painful memory of what came before. You can just see the dominoes falling here, right? First, you had the League of Nations, back in 1920. It was a noble experiment, for sure, but it just didn't have the power to stop what was coming. And what came next was the catastrophe of World War II. It showed the world in the most brutal way possible that a stronger global body wasn't just a nice idea, it was an absolute necessity for survival. So in 1945, 50 nations came together, looked at the mistakes of the past, and signed the UN Charter, determined to build something that would actually last.
So, what was the game plan this time around? Well, the founders laid out a pretty clear 4-part mission. Think of it as a blueprint designed to stop the world from ever spiraling into that kind of chaos again. Let's break this down. Step 1 is the big one, the headline act, maintain peace and security. That's job number 1. But how do you do that? Well, that leads to step 2. You build friendly relations between countries. Step 3 recognizes that, wars often start because of other problems, poverty, inequality. So it calls for global cooperation on all that stuff. And finally, step 4, you need a place for all this to happen, a global stage where countries can talk it out instead of fighting it out. Okay, so that's a huge mission, right? It's going to need a pretty complex structure to even have a chance. So how is the UN actually set up to do all this? Let's pop the hood and see how the engine works. So the UN is basically built around 6 main bodies. You've got the General Assembly and the Security Council. We're going to zero in on them in a sec. But there's also the Economic and Social Council, or ECOSOC, which handles development goals, the International Court of Justice for legal disputes, and the Secretariat, which is kind of like the UN's civil service. They all have their roles, but 2 of them really hold the power and grab all the headlines. The best way to think about it is like this. The General Assembly, that's the world's town hall. Every single member nation gets a seat and 1 vote. It's the big debating chamber where they discuss global issues and make recommendations. But the Security Council, that's the emergency response team. It's a much smaller, more powerful group. And this is the body that has the real teeth. It can impose sanctions, authorize peacekeeping missions, or even approve military action. And inside that emergency response team, there's a special power that only 5 countries have: the UK, the US, Russia, France, and China. It's called the veto, and it means a single no vote from any one of them can kill any major resolution, period. The idea was to make sure the world's biggest powers were always on board. But as you can imagine, this has become the UN's most controversial and honestly, sometimes its most paralyzing feature. Okay, so with all that in mind, how's it gone? Let's give the UN a report card on its main job: keeping the peace. And, well, it's what you'd probably expect. It's a real mixed bag of incredible successes and some pretty frustrating failures. Let's start with a clear win. Back in 1956, the Suez Canal crisis was blowing up, about to become a major war. The UN jumped right in. It got the fighting to stop and deployed its first ever emergency peacekeeping force. That move directly led to the withdrawal of troops and showed everyone what the UN could do when it really worked. It was a huge moment. But then, there's the other side of the coin. That veto power we just talked about, it has often left the UN completely helpless. The source material is very clear on this. If a country starts a conflict but has a friend in one of those 5 permanent seats, the Security Council can be totally gridlocked, unable to do a single thing about it. Here's another success story, though: Cambodia. After years and years of brutal civil war, the UN played a massive role in 1991. It sent in peacekeepers, not to fight, but to help a new government get on its feet and oversee elections. It's a fantastic example of the UN's role in nation building and helping a country find its way back to peace. But during the Cold War, that whole dynamic just fell apart.
With the US and the Soviet Union locked in a global rivalry, the UN was often stuck on the sidelines. In huge, devastating conflicts like the Vietnam War, the organization was described as a mute spectator, totally powerless because the two superpowers were backing opposite sides.
And of course, some challenges aren't simple wins or losses. They're just ongoing. Think about the conflict over Kashmir, or the Arab-Israeli conflict. The UN has been involved in these for decades, brokering ceasefires, providing aid, but a final peace deal? It's still out of reach. And now you have new threats, like global terrorism, that challenge the whole system in a completely different way.
You know, it's also really important to remember that the UN's report card isn't just about war and peace. So much of its most successful work happens completely outside the headlines. I'm talking about its specialized agencies, like the World Health Organization fighting to wipe out diseases, or UNESCO working to protect priceless cultural sites and boost education. This is the stuff that happens every single day, and it makes a massive difference in millions of lives. So, where does all this leave us? When you step back and look at the whole picture, you see an organization that is incredibly complex, deeply, deeply flawed, and yet maybe more essential than it's ever been. This quote from our source material just nails it, I think. Despite all its problems, the UN has become an essential organization for the survival of mankind. It's that global forum, that space for dialogue, that provides a harmonizing effect in a world that's always full of tension. It's not perfect, not by a long shot, but you have to wonder how many conflicts never happened simply because it exists. And that brings us to the final critical question we have to ask ourselves. The UN was built for the world of 1945, a world of nation-states recovering from a massive conventional war. But the challenges we face today, they're totally different. We're talking about global pandemics, climate change, cyber warfare, international terrorism. So, is the institution designed almost 80 years ago still the right tool for the job today? That's the real question for all of us to think about.